So let's get started. First, I'd like to have a chat with you about the study design. It is really important that you omit any extra information that's not really going to be assessed. You know what kind of questions you can get on the exam, and you can only do that if you work closely with the study design. So I recommend everyone should print it out and highlight, annotate, make sure you're all across the key skills and key knowledge dot points, and you don't waste time trying to learn things that aren't really going to be assessed because there's likely to be a bit of an overload of information in your textbook. Now, I'd like to bring your attention to the fact that there is a new study design as of this year for legal studies, 2024 to 2028 study design. Make sure you are not working with the old study design that expired in 2023. So pay attention to that. Mostly the study design changes that have happened with legal studies are very minor. Okay, so what's happened is a lot of bits and pieces of content have actually been taken out rather than been put in. So you guys are working, I can say definitely with an easier study design. As a result, I've also taken some things off of the slides to reflect study design changes. Okay, so this is good. This just means that when you're completing old practice exams and reading the feedback, you need to work closely with your study design to understand what type of questions you wouldn't get asked anymore because it's not part of your new study design, and what parts have changed. Because you will inevitably, since there is no exam available for you, you will inevitably have to work with the exams from the past study design. As I said, luckily the changes are minor, so for the most part, you will be able to use everything. Okay. So on the study design, the key knowledge dot points tell you everything you need to know for the exam. So these literally tell you the content that is assessed. For example, principles of justice. This is actually changed a little bit as well, but it's written in a different format, but you need to know all of these things. Distinction between summary and indictable offenses, burden, standard for presumption of innocence. All of this is still accessible content. They've just kind of put it in a different format. So this means these are all the things that questions in legal studies could be based on that you need to know. So only study what the study design tells you to study. And key skills basically tell you what kind of questions you need to be able to answer with that knowledge. And it's quite self explanatory. They basically tell you what type of questions you can get. Okay. So use examiner's reports and past VCA exams, even though um, some students tend to only use these when exams are getting closer and closer. Use them throughout the year. So when you finish studying Unit 3, Area of Study 1, don't just do your textbook questions, go out of your way and find questions about the civil justice system. Complete them under timed conditions, which is 1.5 minutes per mark. So allocate yourself the time that you're going to have on the exam, and then check whether you got the answer correct and what needed to be included in a high scoring response using the past VCA examiner's report of the same year. There's plenty of information there. There's exemplar responses. This is the main thing that you need to be using to prepare for the legal studies exam. And careful with timing because a lot of students run out of time. So always do timed questions. Prepare you for your SACs as well. So the examinations reports are produced for every single year's exam, and they do have basically sort of detail on how the question would be marked, what needed to be included to achieve full marks, and that exemplar response, basically a top response from a student that took the exam that year. I always like to not only look at what needed to be included for the response, but compare my own response to that exemplar response. Check my structure. Did I go into too much detail and wasted time? Did the student that wrote the exemplar response, did they structure their response in a better, clearer way? terminology, doing all of those things. So it's good to compare yourself to the exemplar response. Don't just disregard them. Try to write like them. And what's included in the examiner's reports, you get mark averages. So you get to see for this 8-mark question, students struggled. On average, the mark was 3.3. This shows you what your competition is in the subject as well. Okay, so if a study score of 45 plus is only top 2% of all the students doing legal studies, tells you, okay, if I want to get a study score of 45 plus, I should have been one of the 3% that got 8 marks, full marks on this question. Okay, um, so this is the percentage of students that scored each one of the marks. Hopefully that's all nice and clear. But it also gives you mark averages and tips on how to get the full marks. So it tells you what needed to be done for the question. Okay, so this gives you, for any extended response, longer question in legal studies, they tend to have a section like this with lots of dot points. And it's quite literally ideas of things that you could have used to answer the question to get towards that full mark range. When you're doing those 6, 8 markers in particular, sometimes you'll find you're missing a couple of points to complete the question and try to get the highest mark allocation. And the examiner's report can really help with this because you'll go on here and you'll find a different idea that you haven't used and you haven't really maybe even thought about yet. And you'll think, oh, okay, in the future, if I have a question like this, I will just use this point in my own words. And then you put it into your notes and you can have it for the rest of the year. So really, really invaluable. Um, that's Unit 4 as well, so don't stress when you look at Parliament and Constitution, etc. Okay, and we see high scoring responses from past students as well. Again, these are the ones that I recommend compare yourself to. This is especially if you're a struggling student, a student that writes way too much, writes in a very unclear way, or doesn't understand how to structure or what level of detail to go into. Try to learn and break down the high scoring responses and figure out how you can write more like them. Figure out what the system is for each sentence, okay? So in this question, we see that the student entered a definition of the referendum process and the relevant section and what a referendum is. So their first sentence, if we're using that formulaic approach, is a definition to answer this question. Then we see a description where where it goes into detail to explain how the votes for a successful referendum can be achieved and outlines this double majority requirement. So this is definition, description, and then by going into more detail, we can see how this achieves an explanation of the whole process. So the whole process is explained. And there is obviously can approve changes without approval of the people. Does the people act as a check? So it gives a strength of the referendum process in by acting as a check on Parliament so that they can't abuse their power, and it gives a weakness as well for the referendum process. And you can see that if you break it down, you can see what's been done in each sentence, and hopefully over the year you'll start to feel that your responses in legal studies are kind of becoming systematic. You don't really have to think about it anymore. You just get a question and you kind of know how to structure it because it's all very repetitive.